I was born in Athens, Georgia on April 1st, 1926. St. Mary's Hospital, which was founded by my grandmother's brother, Dr. Peebles Proctor. And I grew up 18 miles down the road in Jefferson, Georgia. And I went to school at Martin Institute, which was at one time the oldest chartered high school in the United States. And a lot of prominent old Georgians went there as boarding students. But we went to school there through high school. The school burned in 1942, shortly after World War II started. And I finished high school in the Methodist Church and graduated and went to the University of Georgia and graduated from the university with a degree in journalism in 1947. I was a member of Tri Delta sorority and had a good time.
More on that later. Tell me about your parents and your brothers.
Okay, my mother was a Virginian. Her name was Frances Lelia Woodward. And my father grew up in Athens. His name was William Thomas Bryan, Jr. And he and my brothers were William Thomas Bryan III and Harry Woodward Bryan and John Proctor Bryan. And John was born when I was 20 years old at the university. I was a junior living in the sorority house. The whole sorority went down to St. Mary's to see John. And he is now 75, but still my baby brother.
So tell me a little bit about growing up, about your best friend and your
Oh,
depression
well.
memories.
When I was born 10 months after my mother and father were married, and the neighbor up the street was having a baby, and she and my mother had known each other a little bit, but she had her baby on March 25th, a little girl named Betty, Elizabeth Ann, called Betty, and I was born a week later. And in my baby book, Mama wrote, Frances has a little friend named Betty Adderholt, and we were friends until she died in 2016. She was 90 when she died, and we were friends. We were like two peas in a pod. We did everything together, and I called her Udi, which is another story. But if you look at that little blue pillow, you'll see what she gave me on my 80th birthday. She made that for me. But we gave each other birthday and Christmas presents for 89 years before she died. And we always said we're from the womb to the tomb. But Udi and I were just inseparable, and we just did everything together. When we were real little, we used to run away. And if the fire alarm went off, we took off and would go to the fire, wherever it was. And our mothers were constantly, and they finally put up chicken wire in the yard to keep in a sand pile, and we would play behind the chicken wire. And we look at pictures now, we could have jumped off the steps very easily, but we never figured that out. After they got the chicken wire up, they kept us. And she had a little brother, and I had a little cousin, both a year younger than we were, and the four of us played together all the time. And my cousin had older brothers and sisters that I played with. We just had a good time. We lived on Lawrenceville Street, and when we got a little older, we used to play kick the can, and the game would go on and on and on. All summer we played kick the can, and we just had an idyllic childhood on Lawrenceville Street. We just thought we were in heaven, and everybody wanted to live on Lawrenceville Street because we had such a good time.
So what was Jefferson like back then?
Well, when I was born, the streets were dirt, and the road to Athens was dirt, and the road to Gainesville, which went the other way, was dirt. And I remember when they paved the Gainesville Road. I don't remember the Athens Road being paved, but they finally paved them. But it was just a little southern town with the square with the Confederate monument and a monument to Crawford Long. Dr. Crawford Long used ether as anesthetic, you know, and you probably haven't heard of him, but he was the famous Jeffersonian. He performed the first operation with ether down on the square in town, and so there was a great big monument to him down there, and it was really a circle. And the town was sort of built, and there were just a few stores, and it was just. But we had a picture show. And oh, we just grew up with the movies. That was what Udi and I did. We went. There'd be one movie on Monday, one on Tuesday and Wednesday, and one on Thursday and Friday, and then on Saturday the westerns. And we always went to the westerns, and then we would go down to the creek and play after we'd been to the movies on Saturday. That was just the Saturday ritual until we got older, and then we get on the bus and go to Athens. And
how far away was Athens?
And we
How far away was Athens?
18 miles, and you got there by bus or train. We could go on the little train. Sometimes we'd go on the little train, but most often we'd go on the bus. And nobody had cars. And we walked everywhere, and we'd walk all over town. We just never thought about riding anywhere. And then, of course, World War II came along and changed a lot of things. But
do you have any memories of the Depression?
oh yeah. Well, my father was one owner of the cotton mill. Textile mill there in town. Well, that was the main business in town. And my daddy and my uncle and my grandfather, who had died, owned the mill. And the mill just closed down. So we moved to Athens to live with my grandmother. And my parents had no income. And they rented their house for $25 a month. And that was the only income they had. So we lived with my grandmother. We were fortunate that we had a grandmother who could take us in, and she had a great big house in Athens, and we lived over there. And I went to the first grade in Athens at the University Demonstration School, where the teachers learned to teach. And all my relatives over there, I mean, a lot of them were connected with the university, and I guess that's why I went. I don't really know why they sent me to that school. There was another school right across the street, but I don't know why they sent me to the demonstration school. But so I missed out on the first grade in Jefferson, but then we moved back in time for me to go to the second grade. And my brothers were younger. My next brother was almost 5 years younger and the other one was 2 years younger than he was. So they never went to school in Athens, but I did. We lived over, and it was just. I remember sitting in my grandmother's house listening to Roosevelt on the fireside chats, and that's when I became a Republican. I've been a Republican ever since. Still trying to be one, but it's not easy.
So, do you remember how much a movie cost back then?
Probably a dime.
And then there's a note about the what kind of treat did you have there?
What did you call those things? Sugar daddies. And if they had chocolate on, they were black cows. But we'd stop at Miss Isabel's store and get sugar daddy. It was on a stick. I don't know whether you can still get them right. It was caramel, you know. So we'd suck on those during the movie, and then we'd go down to the creek and usually drop your sugar daddy in the creek. So, but those were a nickel. I had my allowance was a quarter, and I had to wash my socks and underpants. That was my job that I had to do at home. We didn't have a washing machine, and nobody did. We weren't poor, we were just normal. But, so I had to kind of clean up my room and take care of my clothes. And then I got a quarter, and you cost a nickel to get your sugar daddy, and then a dime to get in the movie, and you had a dime left. And we usually would go to the movies again later in the week, and that was how we spent our money. We didn't collect much. I mean, we didn't accumulate much, but that was the way. And we used to go on picnics a lot, and cookouts, and then the really big thing was when in 1940. Well, when I was a junior in high school, 8 of us met on the bridge down at the creek. The creek was downtown, it went through downtown. And there was a bridge that we always called the White Bridge. It wasn't white, but we called it white. And 8 of us were down on the bridge, and we spit into the creek and pledged that we had a secret code, and we were inseparable. And we never took anybody else into our club. Everybody wanted to be in our club, and we called it the Kabua Club. And that was because the seniors, 4 of them were seniors and 4 of us were juniors. The seniors were studying Kabua, who was the Prime Minister of Italy or something like that, and we just liked the name Kabua, so we called ourselves the Kabuas. And we got to be quite famous around town, and everybody wanted to be a Kabua, but the Elevars were the other clubs, so the other people, the lesser people had to be in the Elevars. We were the Kabuas. But we kept our friendship until I'm the last one.
Really?
And we had many, many, many wonderful times.
So what kinds of things did you like to do? And
Well,
were there ever boys involved?
Oh, yeah. And the boys, we were 9 miles from Commerce. And the Commerce boys used to come over. And, of course, we had Jefferson boys, too. But the big thing was for the Commerce boys to come over. And one of them had an A-model Ford with a rumble seat. And Herc Harris was his name. And he and my friend Mary Alice and Herc were a couple, and her father was chief of police, and Herc would come over and get Mary Alice and some of us in the car, and we'd go backwards around the circle, and Mr. Griffith would stand there and say, "Is Mary Alice in that car? Is Mary Alice in that car?" And we'd say, and we'd all be huddled down so he wouldn't know who was in the car, because he'd go tell our parents, if we did anything wrong. We had to be real careful about Mr. Griffith. Oh, we did all kinds of things. One time, one of a lady threatened us. She said we tried to set her house on fire on Halloween. I think we shot firecrackers on the porch, and there were leaves or something, but anyway, we got in trouble about that, and got in trouble about a lot of things, but and we steal watermelons from Mr. Love Whitehead's pasture, and he shot a shotgun one night to scare us off of there, and he would go and tell my daddy, "Francis and those boys up there getting in my watermelons again," and we just had a good time, a lot of good times.
So did you have like school dances and things like that in high school? And how big was your high school class?
Well, after I don't know how many were in it before the fire, but after that senior year, there were just 20 of us who graduated. And just 5 of us were from town. Now, I didn't tell you that, but most of the people who came to school rode the school bus. And the only time Udi and I really had a real bad fuss was when Eva Merrill Davis invited me to ride the bus home with her one day, and she didn't invite Udi. And Udi got real bad, and we had to work on getting back together. But they would all come in, and so there were just 20 of us left to graduate. And what was the other
So
thing?
tell me about the fire.
Oh, okay. The not Mr. Griffith, but the chief of police's son. They lived right behind the school, and he wanted a job, so he went up and poured gasoline on the floor of the school and set it on fire. And it was, yeah, you can go in there and get a picture of the school. It's leaning on the clock in there on the desk
Okay.
in the green room. And it was 2-story in the middle and had stairs that went up like this, and it just sucked that fire up, and there was nothing that could be done. And the fire truck, they tried to start the fire truck, and the hoses had rotted. So they had to call fire trucks from Athens, and it took them forever to get there. And we were just we were just so upset when the school burned.
And what was the point of him burning it?
He wanted a job cleaning up. He thought he was a little bit,
Oh, okay.
what would you call him now? We called him retarded back then, but you can't say that now. But it was sad. It was really sad.
So most kids had to go to another school. They had to go to another school.
Yeah,
So-
well, we went to school in the churches until the new
Oh.
school was built. Yeah, they did. I graduated the next year. But we went to school in the Methodist church, and there was a little separate building for the home economics and the shop classes, and we had that building and the Methodist church, and that's where we went to school
That's
for a
sad.
year. And that was during the war, 42.
So what was it like when the war started?
Well, when the 50th anniversary of the war, Pearl Harbor came along, I apologized to all the men I knew who had fought in the war, because we just were having a good time being teenagers, and it affected our lives. We had rationing, which was probably the biggest effect it had on us, and you couldn't get tires, and so nobody used their cars much. And one of my friends, boy, had his father's car one time, and it was an old four-door Ford, and the boys decided they wanted to see how fast they could get to Commerce, 9 miles away. Commerce was our big rival, and they wanted to see how fast they'd get to Commerce. And we got in that car, another girl and I got in the back seat, and 2 boys, and Johnny Mobley drove that car. He broke the record. I've forgotten what it was, but he broke the record. And we came back to Jefferson, and his father went to see my father and said, "Bill, so one of those kids weren't killed." He said, "My ties are about as thick as a piece of tissue paper." And he said, "I don't know why they weren't killed." And he said, "You need to talk to Francis." And I am certainly talking to Johnny. So we did things like that, but I know you asked us if we had dances. We could not dance. It was against the rules to dance. It was Baptist and Methodist, you didn't dance.
Oh, okay.
So in the war, Thomas Benton was 5 years older than me, but he had graduated from Georgia, and for some reason he asked me for a date, and he asked Goody for a date, and her mother wouldn't let her date him because he was too old. But my mother and his mother were great friends, so when he asked me for a date, Mama said, I guess it's okay. Sally Gates, he can't be too bad. He had kind of a bad reputation. But anyway, we got to be an item there when he went away to the war. But his daddy was the county superintendent of schools. So Henry Robinson was president of our class, and Henry and I were great. We were the doers in the class. We'd get things done. So we went to see Mr. Benton and said, we want to dance at our prom. And he said, well, I don't know. He says, we still have loud dancing at school. And we had said, and I think it was because I was dating Thomas that he said, well, okay, we could dance. So we had the first dance that they ever had in Jefferson at first school dance.
Was it controversial?
No, nothing ever happened about it. I don't think anybody had really thought about it. We just wanted to dance.
It's a footloose.
And we had a teacher, and she made this. They made this big wooden V, and it had placed screw light bulbs in, and she wanted each one of us at the graduation to screw in a light bulb, and then they would all light up. It was V for victory. And she wanted us to sing, we must be vigilant. Y'all don't know that, but we must be vigilant, American Patrol. It was a big World War II song. And she wouldn't let us sing the alma mater. Well, we just rose up. And Henry and I, my uncle, happened to be the chairman of the Board of Education, so we went up to Uncle Morris's, and I'll never forget, we knocked on the door, and my aunt came through, and she said, Francis, you know you don't have to knock, you can just come in. And I said, we're here on business to see Uncle Morris. And so Uncle Morris came to the door, and we told him, we said, we want to sing the alma mater, and Miss Henderson won't let us do it. And he said, I'll take care of it. So we sang the alma mater. So Henry and I were the leaders. And Henry was Udi's boyfriend. So that was a connection too. The three of it. Udi was in the background.
Tell me about your summers at Raven Gap with
Okay, my grandmother had a farm. My grandmother lived in Athens, but she had a farm. She and my grandfather had bought this farm up at Raven Gap. And if you've ever heard of the Raven Gap Nacoochee School, it was across the road from that. And they had, actually my grandfather introduced Black Angus cattle to Georgia. There were no Black Angus cattle, but they had cattle, and that was the main reason for the farm. But they built this house up there, a summer house, and my grandmother would go up there in May when I got out of school and stay until October, and then she'd go back to Virginia to visit her sister, and then she'd come back to Athens. But I would go up there with her, and my cousin, the cousin I was talking about, who's a little younger than I, we'd go up there with Granny. And I always thought I was being punished sent away from Jefferson because everything was going to, Udi would write me these letters. I saw Charles at the movies, and I wish you were here. And, and Tommy and I would just grieve over not being in the big Jefferson Society for the summer. But we had a wonderful time up there. And my grandmother was real strict, but she taught me. I had two wonderful grandmothers. They were as different as night and day. They were entirely different, but they both taught me, I think they taught me more than anybody else I've ever, in my life. They were my, But my grandmother was, she taught me all the wildflowers and to love nature, and she had this huge garden, and we'd have to go down and weed the garden and dig up potatoes, and it was just wonderful.
What was her name?
Her name was Harriet, but she was always called Hattie. She was Miss Hattie or Aunt Hattie or Sister Hattie to everybody.
What was your other grandmother's name?
Myrtle, and she hated it. And Mama wanted to name me Myrtle, and she said no way. So her name was Fanny Myrtle Smith Woodward. We had the rationing, was really a memory, top memory about the war, as it affected my life. But one time, my grandmother lived in Washington, and the sugar was one of the highly rationed things, So my grandmother mailed a box of sugar to us so that Mom could make us goodies, And my brother, and back then, when you got a package at the post office, they'd put a little yellow notice in your mailbox, and you had to go down and pick up the package. So Mama sent my brother Billy to pick up the sugar at the post office. And he was leisurely walking up the hill, which was about, I would say, as far as from our house to the gate at Club Fires. And there was a hole in the package, and the sugar drained out. And by the time he got home, there was just about a cup of sugar left. So that was one memory of the war. And the other was, we did not know what was going on in the war. We didn't have newscasts, we didn't have TV, we had radio, and we had newscasts. And at the movies, we'd have newsreels that would show things that had happened a month before. So we never knew what was going on in the war. Everything was censored. All my letters to my boyfriend, Thomas Benton, all those letters were censored. And you'd get them a month later after they were written. It was just unbelievable now with all the technology. But I just wanted to throw that in, that our lives were affected by the war. Yeah.
So tell me about going to college.
Well, I wanted to go to Georgia from the day I was born, because my grandmother lived there, and she had a fence, fence with a place you could sit on top of the fence. And I used to sit out there and watch them go up and down in T model Fords and A model Fords, and I thought if I could just go to the university, that would be that would be it. Well, my mother did not want me to go to a co-ed school. She thought I would go to a girls' school. She wanted me to go to Virginia, back to her school, which was Mary Baldwin. And I didn't want to go that far away from home during the war, because you couldn't get on a train. You couldn't get a seat on a train, and I didn't want to get that far away from home. So I said, I refused to do it. And so I had a lot of cousins who had gone to Agnes Scott. So it was determined that I would go to Agnes Scott for 2 years, and then I could go to Georgia. Well, I hated that place. I called it Agony Spot. I made some good friends, and I really had some good times over there, but I hated that place. And I was a good student. I was not valedictorian of my class, but I was second graduate, I think, and I never had any trouble with school, but I was not prepared, coming from a little country town, for Agnes Scott. All the high girls in Atlanta, they were trained to go to Agnes Scott, and they knew what they were doing. I didn't have Latin in high school, and they'd all had Latin. I hated it. So I called it Agnes Spot. And so the summer after my freshman year, I said, Mama, I can't go back. I just can't. And we went back round and round and round. So finally, Athens was really home. and all my relatives lived up there. And I had an uncle, a great uncle, who was the dean of the School of Physics and dean of the faculty. I had aunts who were teaching, and I just had many connections in the university. So I just went over there and went to see the registrar. I can't remember his name now, but and I said, I want to come to, and this was in the middle of the summer. And I said, I want to come over here, but my mother thinks it's a bad place for girls. And so he said, you bring your mother over here. So I took, so I said, Mama, would you go and talk to Mr. I can't remember his name. And she said, okay, she go. So he said, Miss Bryan, I could tell you many more bad stories about those girls over at Agnes Scott than you ever hear about the girls over here. So he said, I think you should let her come. So Mama said, okay. So in August, I got in the university. You didn't have any trouble getting in. And I lived in a dormitory that the Navy had taken over the university, many of the buildings. And naval, what they call it, anyway, the dorm, they had released one of the dorms, and it was a boys' dorm, but I was assigned to one dorm, and then I was put in that one. And anyway, we had to wait while they changed the bathrooms from urinals into that. So, but I got there, and Mama said, "You're not gonna be happy over here. You're just not gonna be happy." And I said, "Mama, I think I'm gonna be fine." Well, we went in, and my roommate was from rural South Georgia, and she'd gotten there before me, and she'd taken over the room completely. And she was just impossible, I'm telling you. And I burst into tears, and she was not in the room. And Mama said, I knew you weren't going to be happy then. I just knew you weren't going to be happy. But anyway, to make a long story short, I swapped rooms with somebody, and I got a new roommate. And we had to walk way up the hill to the dining hall, and we had classes. Now, if you're familiar with Georgia at all, there's the Ag Hill is over here, and the stadium is down in the hole, and then the rest of the campus is over here. And we used to have to walk from that campus all the way up the other hill to other classes sometimes. And we just walked everywhere, and I just loved it. It was just heaven to me to be in Athens, and I've always loved Athens. I tried to get Will to move to Athens so I could go to Athens too, and but he didn't end up there. He ended up here. But
So tell me about your sorority.
Well, then I didn't join the sorority that first rush. I joined after Christmas that year, and I was a sophomore. And the next year I moved into the house, and I lived in the house for 2 years, and that was just great. There were about 20 of us in the house. There were 6 of us in one room. We had 3 bunk beds, and we shared a bathroom with the girls in the next room. Udi had gone to Charter up in Rome, and she stayed up there for 2 years. And then she came, and her roommate up there came to Georgia and pledged Theta. And Theta was right across the street. And Udi came to Georgia as a junior. And we rushed her, and I thought, if Udi doesn't pledge, it's going to kill me. Well, and her roommate, Ann Neisler, was standing over on the Theta walk, and I was on the Tridel walk, and Udi came up walking up the street, and she turned into Tridel. That was just all I needed. And so Udi lived in the next room behind me, and we had to share bathroom with 6 of us and 4 of them. And then we had another bathroom, and we called it the Grand Station, I think. It was, it was funny. I don't guess I want to go into that, but it was really funny. But anyway, we just had a great time.
Did you have a lot of rules at the sorority house?
Oh, we had an alcoholic. Well, we had an alcoholic house mother. We had a house mother. Her name was Octavia Kendig, and we called her Tave. And she had a bedroom downstairs, and she very rarely ever came out. But she had all kinds of rules about. And one rule was that you couldn't go into the kitchen and get glasses out and drink water. And we didn't have any paper cups or anything during the war. You didn't have any paper products, so we had to have glasses. And she put locks on the cabinets. So Eleanor Walker and I went down one night, and the cook had left the cabinets unlocked, and the locks were there. So we just took the locks and hid them. We called it the rape of the locks. And Eleanor was a senior, and it was just about time for graduation. And so Tave got us all together, and the president, Pat Cunningham, was president, and she got us all. We were sitting on the steps, and so we got, whoever did this has to come clean. We got to get the locks out. Well, Eleanor and I didn't do a thing. Nobody knew. We didn't tell anybody. So finally, Eleanor got scared and said, "They're not gonna let me graduate, Bree. We've got to do something." So we had to own up, and because we were in trouble, they sent us down to see Dean Tate. You always had to go see Dean Tate if you did something wrong. And Tate made a big to do about it. Now, I almost got thrown out another time. I wrote an editorial for an assignment, and the darn professor thought it was so well written that he had published it in the Red and Black. Well, I was looking for a subject for my editorial, and I told this friend of mine, Mary Ann Doss, I said, "Mary Ann, I've got to write an editorial. Tell me something to write about." Well, she was in graduate school, and she said, "Write about how horrible a graduate school is." And I've forgotten what she told me, but I wrote all this stuff about the graduate school. And the dean named him. Well, Dean Drury called me in his office, and he said, "Miss Brown," he always called me Miss Brown, what are we going to do about this? Well, I had to go to see that dean and apologize. My cousin, my daddy's cousins, really, but they were like aunts to me. They lived next door to my grandmother. They were old maids, and they all were one of them was a librarian at the university, one was the home economics teacher, and I had to go apologize to them. I've forgotten what, I was in real trouble. And I had to see Dean Tate, but, and my daddy grew up with Dean Tate in Athens. Dean Tate is, if you've ever known anybody who went to the university back in our day, they'll tell you about Dean Tate. And he was just a character, if there ever was one.
So did you eat all your meals in the sorority house?
Yeah, and we had a cook and 2 maids, and one time, and we had these big evening dresses, with great big skirts. And one time I took one of my dresses to one of the maids, and I said, "Would you?" I can't remember her name, but I said, "Can you press this for me? Iron this for me?" And she said, "No, but I'll teach you how." I'll never forget that. I had to iron that. But we had these dresses. And I remember one time we were having a Valentine dance, and I wanted a red dress. And there was a store downtown. It later became Davison's, but it was Michael's department store. and Miss Minnie Hausman worked there, and she was a little old lady. She always wore black, and she had a black band around her neck, and she was in charge of the dresses at Michael's, and that's where everybody got their clothes. And I went down to Miss Mamie, and I said, Miss Mamie, I want a red dress. Well, she finally came up with a red evening dress, but it had this tight skirt. So this roommate of mine, she could sew, and so she said, Bree, we'll just put a gusset in the skirt, but we had to get fabric and dye it red with red dye, and we did this in the bathroom at the sorority house, and then we put gussets in the skirt on both sides so I could dance with the skirt. But that was,
So what would you all wear to class?
oh, we wore pleated skirts and sweaters and twin sets, and that was pretty much it.
Pretty dressed up.
Never pants.
Sam, what did you major in?
Journalism, and never did much with it except teach it. But
And so did you have a lot of dates and
well, there weren't many boys there, you know.
That's right.
So we had to just sort of entertain but we did have boys, but I never had I did have one romance, but after the war, my senior year, they started coming back, and Jimmy DeLay and Fluker Stewart were the first two veterans to come back, and then we knew everybody. The campus, it was just like a high school campus almost, because we just knew everybody. And the boys all started coming back. Well, the Delta Tau Deltas were supposed to be our brother fraternity, you know, of the Tridels. So they asked us if they could, the ones of them who came back, if they could come to our house and meet and try to get reorganized after the war. And I met one of them, and oh man, he was about as sorry as anybody you ever knew, but I fell madly in love. He had the most beautiful blue eyes you've ever seen. His name was Earl Brown. We called him Early Birdie Brown, but anyway, he was my one college.
What happened to Earl?
He broke my heart. He broke my heart.
Oh.
He finally wrote me a letter and said, I think you'd better forget that I ever existed.
Well, that didn't come true.
No, I think he was, I guess, the only other romantic tendency I've had.
Is there anything else you want to say about Athens or Georgia before we move on?
Well, I don't know of anything. It was, and we graduated, and had a wonderful time.
Well, tell me about teaching, early days of teaching.
Okay, I went home, and I had no idea what I was going to do, and by this time, John was about a year old, my little brother. So I just took over John, and I just adored him, and so I went home, not having any idea what I was going to do. I hadn't even thought about it, I don't think. And Mary Ann Doss, the same one who got me in trouble, was interviewed for a teaching position up in Gainesville, but she had taken another job. So she told the people in Gainesville that I might be interested in teaching. They needed a journalism. She was a journalism major too, and they needed a journalism teacher and English, journalism and English. So she told them about me, and the superintendent up there got in touch with me and asked me if I'd be interested. So yeah, so I took the job and I taught in Gainesville for 2 years.
What age were you teaching?
I taught high school seniors and ninth graders. And they gave me this bunch of bad little boys, and but I had a good time. I loved it, loved teaching. Wish I'd kept it up. I've always been sorry I didn't keep teaching.
What did you do after that?
Well, then I decided after 2 years that I wanted to go to Atlanta, and I had a friend who taught in Atlanta, one of the Kabuas, Jean, and so I called Jean and I said, Jean, I'm tell me about teaching. Oh, she was teaching at a high school in Atlanta, and I said, I think I want to come over there. And she, oh, Bree, dude, that'd be wonderful. So I did, and got a job, and there was a lady in Jefferson who ran a boarding house when my daddy came to Jefferson in 1922, and he lived in her boarding house when he first went to Jefferson with the mill. And she moved to Atlanta and had a boarding house in Atlanta down on West Peachtree. And I lived with Miss Jessie. My daddy had lived with her in 1922, and I lived with her in 1948, 49. And there were about, I think 3 of us slept in a bed together. I really do. And Miss Jessie hadn't ever cleaned that house. It was filthy. And she was practically blind. Everybody in Jefferson loved Miss Jessie. And if you went to Atlanta, you lived with Miss Jessie. So anyway, I lived there for 1 year, and then my sorority sister came to Atlanta, and she got in bed with Miss Jessie. And so Jinx and I decided we wanted an apartment. So we went out and rented an apartment, Colonial Homes. You know Colonial Homes?
I lived there.
Everybody whoever came to Atlanta lived in Colonial Homes. Well, we rented this apartment, but I was making about $150 a month, and Jinx was working at Rich's. She was making about $30 a month, and she had a car, and she insisted that we had to rent a garage for her car, so we were renting an apartment and a garage with that much. So we decided we needed another roommate, and we had a sorority sister who was married and who was teaching at E River School, and she said, well, I have this friend over there who's living with her aunt, and she has to move out because the aunt is sick. She had cancer, and she's looking for a place to live. And we said, oh, so tell us about it. So we got in touch with Bess, and we went to Rich's, to the Magnolia Room. Did you ever hear of the Magnolia Room? For lunch. And we had lunch, and we didn't have enough money to have dessert. And Bess said, I know how we can have dessert. We can tell them it's somebody's birthday. So she told them it was birthday, and they brought us a little cake. And Jinx looked at me, and I looked at her, and we said, we think she'll be a great one. And boy, was she. She got to be one of the best friends I have had. And we had, I can't tell you what, we just had so much fun living together at Colonial Homes. Until, well, then we moved a couple of times. Bess, well, I can't remember all that, but anyway, that didn't matter. We just had a real good time. But then I met Leo, and the friend who taught at E. River's husband was a football coach at Marist. He was Shorty Dowell's assistant. You'd probably never heard of Shorty Dowell, but he was famous at Marist football. And he had a friend named Shag Cates, and Shag was a friend of Leo's. And Nancy asked Jinx to, wait a minute now. Oh, by that time we had another roommate named BJ. And she asked BJ to have a date with Shag. And Shag said, can I bring my buddy along for that other girl? And that was me. And BJ was knockout good looking girl. And they walked in and Leo walked up to BJ and Shag said, this one's yours. And that was me. We went out and we was all school teachers, you know. We were supposed to go to meeting the next day. We had the day off because we were all supposed to go to this meeting. Well, we went out and we stopped at a liquor store and went in, and Leo said Leo said, I'll pay for half of that bottle, Shag. And Shag said, you get your own. So Leo decided this is a great crowd. I'm going to enjoy this. He was just home from the war, you know. And so we went back to the apartment, and Bess was there. She hadn't been out with us, and she put on a show I'll never forget. And we just had the best time and really drank too much, so none of us went to the meeting the next day. But that's how Leo and I got started.
So did you like him right away?
Well, Bess said, Bree, I like that boy. He's nice, but not for you because he's too quiet. And so, but then he called me right away and asked me for a date, and I already had a date with a golf pro. That was funny. But anyway, that was a lost cause. But anyway, he called me again and he said, I have a problem. Will you go up to, there was a drive-in place up there right up on Peachtree from Colonial Homes. Will you go up there with me and have a Coke? And so a beer or something. And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. So I went up there with him and his sister-in-law, who turned out, you remember Aunt Lillian?
Yeah.
Well, it turned out to be Aunt Lillian. He'd gotten mad, he'd made his sister-in-law mad because he took her to work every morning, to the bus every morning in his car. And she didn't get ready on time, and he left her, and it made her mad. And she wouldn't speak to him. So then he was trying to, and I said, well, I'd let her walk if I wouldn't worry about it. I'll never forget that. But anyway, that was our first date, and then after that,
He was the one for you?
huh?
You knew he was the one for you?
Well, I did, but you know, he was a Catholic, Jan, and I couldn't go that route, and he wanted me to be a Catholic, you know. And I was working, by that time I had quit teaching, and I was working for a publishing company. And my boss was the first reader of the Christian Science Church. And he was trying to get me to be a Christian Scientist, and Leo was trying to get me to be a Catholic. And in the middle of that, I joined the Episcopal Church. I had meant to be an Episcopalian all my life because my mother was one. And she thought you couldn't go to heaven unless you were Episcopalian. So I was raised as an Episcopalian, but we didn't have a church at home. So I went to the Baptist church. But anyway, I just couldn't go that route. So finally, we fooled around for 3 years, and finally Leo said, I'll marry you in the middle of Peachtree Road. And I said, no, how about the chapel at St. Philip's? And he said, okay. So.
And what year was that? You got married what year?
53.
53, 3 years afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
We dated for 3 years, and we used to talk about whether we were glad some people would say you wasted those 3 years, but we had such a good time. And Leo took care of all my roommates. One time, one of the girls, Jinx, had this boy's records, old phonograph records, in her car. And that was just incidental, but somebody stole her car. One morning she went out to get in her car, and the car was not there. And she came in and said, "We have to call Leo. My car's gone." Never thought about calling the police, to call Leo. And poor Leo came over, and he looked after my roommates and me, really, for 3 years. He took care of all three of us.
So tell me about your wedding. Was it a big wedding? Or?
No. His parents wouldn't come, so we had a very...
Because he wasn't marrying a Catholic?
Yes.
Ah.
They were not happy. They finally got over it, but they were not happy about it. So we had a very quiet wedding at the chapel at St. Philip's, and a little reception at my apartment, but nothing.
Did you go on a honeymoon?
Yeah, we went to Jamaica.
Oh, wow. And what was it like to fly on a plane then?
Well, we stopped in Cuba. We flew that far, and then we had to stop and refuel.
Wow.
And then go on to Jamaica. But I don't remember a whole lot about we drove to Miami and spent the night in Miami, and then we flew to Cuba, and then flew to what's the Jamaica capital of Jamaica?
Oh gosh.
Hamilton.
Okay.
And then we went up into the mountains to a place called oh gosh, I can't think of it. It's a beautiful resort, and I can't think of the name of it. Ocho Rios, I think, was the town, and we had it was great. Leo had been there on a cruise, and he said, "If I ever get married, I'm gonna come here on my honeymoon." So that's how we happened to go there.
So where did you live as young newlyweds?
We lived in his apartment.
Where was that?
Over on Piedmont. It's where Sam's Club is now.
Okay.
I think they tore him down. He was Georgia Tech, and a couple of his friends came back from the war, and there was no place to live. Leo he rented a room over on Piedmont Road from a lady on Piedmont Road up in Buckhead. And these Alvin Barge and a couple of others in his class at Tech came back and built these apartments. I can't think of the name of them that we lived in, but they were like colonial homes. Everybody lived there because they were available. So we lived in his. So he moved there. He had lived there at least a year before we were married. Then we lived there until we bought our house.
And where the house in?
The house was in. I can't think of any of these neighborhoods.
Like the East Paces Ferry.
Yes,
Yeah,
East
right.
Paces Ferry, which was right off Piedmont, before you get to Peachtree. There's a little neighborhood down in there.
Right behind Lennox.
I know, and I've forgotten the name too. I was just there.
Hills, something Hills.
It wasn't Garden Hills, no. But anyway, it was. I loved that house, and you want me to tell about moving? About
Yeah.
we had all our children there. William was a baby, and we had the house had one bedroom, and Leo enclosed the little porch, which was about as big as this. And Will was out in the baby bed in there, and the other three were in the bedroom, and we slept in a kind of a pass-through from the bedroom to the kitchen. But I loved that house. I just loved it. But anyway, we had to move. It had a wonderful attic. It had stairs to the attic, and it could have been made into and a great big lot. And we had planned to, but then they built Lenox Square, and the traffic was unbelievable. One time, Ellen got out of the backyard and was sitting in the middle of the street, and a neighbor found her. And I was in the kitchen reading the newspaper, and he brought Ellen home. But anyway, we decided we had to move because this was no place to raise children. So we found Glove Forest. But we went back over to, well, I had a run-in with Jane Collins. And we went back over to the old house to get some stuff we'd left for some reason. And I burst into tears. I don't want to leave this house. I don't want to move up there. I don't think we're not going to be happy. Bill said, we'll be happy. We'll be happy. But Jane Collins came over. Leo and I were out in the yard. And she came over and said, I'm Jane Collins, smoking a cigarette. I'm Jane Collins. And she said, if one drop of water goes from your yard to mine, I will sue you. And my father is the dean of trial lawyers in Chicago, Illinois. And that began that story that I won't tell anymore about.
Let's just back up 1 minute. So you had 4 children in how many years?
5.
In 5 years.
Michael, and then Leah 17 months later, and then Ellen 2 years later. Leo always said, tell everybody the girls are 2 years apart. And then Will came 19 months after Elle. So it's been 5 years. 5 years.
And so,
Yeah.
where were they all born?
Georgia Baptist Hospital.
And did you have any help at home in those days?
I had a lady, Mrs. Fuller, who came when the babies were born, but I had a maid. I always had a cleaning lady, a maid, and somebody to stay with the children a little bit.
And you had a lot of friends with babies at the time?
Yeah.
So your friends probably were having babies.
And I was in the Tri-Delt alumni group, and my friend, I got to know, well, some of us on East Paces Ferry organized a garden club. And I got to know Martha Dean, who lived up on the corner of where the diner is now, on East Paces Ferry. You know, the Buckhead Diner. She lived in a house right there. And Martha and I got to be just really good friends for the rest of her life. And I had other friends in that neighborhood, but then of course I moved to Club Forest, and the rest is history.
So tell us about Club Forest.
Well, the street was brand new, and everybody's houses were built all at the same time. I mean, within, a short time of each other. And I think there were over 100 of you all in school age, counting high school. I think there were 105 children on that one street. And it was just the perfect place to raise a family. And your parents and the Goods and the Rosses, and we just all fell in with each other, and boy, we had a good time.
So tell us when you started your 4th of July party.
Well, I guess when we first moved in, they were having the 4th of July parade, with the children. And, you all would always get dressed up in costumes and everything. And Leo, at 1 year, shortly after we moved in 1963. And your parents moved in a couple of months after we did. The Goods moved a couple of months before we did. And Leo had beer and pretzels in the carport down there after the parade one year. And it just grew from that. But it was his idea from the beginning. And then I would cook and devil eggs and potato salad and ham, and he would make that punch.
So what was in the punch?
A little bit of everything. We have the recipe. Michael has the recipe. But Joanne Healy and Jane Kirtland and all, they would say, "Where's the punch?" We drank, Jan. Oh gosh, we drank. I don't believe y'all drink as much. The young people drink. I ask Lanier this all the time. I say, Lanier, do y'all drink as much as we used to? Man, we used to drink. Woo! And we had 2 or 3 alcoholics in the neighborhood. Well, that you know that we really didn't. We didn't know they were alcoholics.
How would you tell?
Leo would always look at me, and I remember one time at your house, Leo would look at me and like cut me off. He would cut me off. But and when it snowed, the Duffys would always have, the big people would always go to, we called ourselves the big people. And Michael was talking the other night about big people's cokey. We used to call liquor big people's cokey. And we didn't drink wine. Nobody drank wine back then. It was hard liquor.
Mm-hmm.
And man, we had some drinking. But we'd go down to the Duffys, and Phil Duffy had all the old music on tape, you know, and we'd get down in their basement. We had some good parties. And I'll never forget one time we were walking back up the hill, it was snowing, and Susan and Jack and Leo and I and Bob and Jean, and I said, Lord, I don't know what we're going to eat when we get home. And your mother said, well, I made a big pot of soup. And we all went, we said, okay, so we all went over to your house. Then I remember another time, she called me one day, and she didn't have a car for some reason, and Greg got sick at school over at McClatchy. And she said, Bree, will you take me over there to get Greg? And I said, sure. So I took her over there, and we came back. And for some reason, I went in the house with her, and she had made apple dumplings. And I said, Jean, Greg's not going to be able to eat his dumpling. Please give it to me. I loved that. And she said, no. I'll never forget that. My mother used to make apple dumplings, and I hadn't had one in years. And I thought, oh man, I would love to have that apple dumpling. She said, no. Another time I was talking to your mother, and we were talking on the phone. We used to talk on the phone a lot. And we were talking, and she said, oh, a snake went under my stove. And I said, Jean, what are you going to do? And she said, well, I'm baking potatoes, and Bob will be home in a little while, and I'll just let him take care of it. And it turned out to be a rat. Do you remember that? And but she said, I've got potatoes in there, bacon. I'll just leave them in the. I thought, oh man, I would have been out of that house. But do you ever watch HGTV?
Not much.
Well, there's one called Hometown.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
It's the great big guy with the.
Yeah.
She reminds me of your mother.
Really?
Yes,
I know
yes,
who you're
she
talking
does.
about.
She does.
Oh,
I
that's
can't remember her
funny.
name, but she's so real cute.
I know who you're talking about. Oh, so what about Girl Scouts?
Oh, I think I had more fun than y'all did. That was great.
And campouts and cookie
Yeah.
sales.
Eleanor Mostella and your mother I'll never forget when your mother went on a cold night and she wore long underwear, thermal underwear. Do you remember that?
Yes, I think I remember that came about.
And I remember one time we set the place on fire. You remember that?
No.
And oh, I just loved the Girl Scouts. I think I had a whole lot more fun than y'all did.
How about McClatchy?
Oh, well, I was, I was active in the PTA, and I got to know Miss Calloway real well. And I used to go up there and visit Miss Calloway, and when the schools were integrated, Austin Ford was an Episcopal priest downtown. He had, I can't think, the Emmaus House that the Episcopal Church had started. It was a civil rights thing from the get-go. And he lived down there. He was an old bachelor priest, and he got a bunch of black mothers when they were going to bus, and brought them to McClatchy. And Miss Calloway called me up and she said, "Okay, Episcopal mother, get yourself up right now." And so I got up there to welcome the black mothers, and Austin Ford, and I knew him, and he knew me, and he knew my proclivities. But anyway, that was one time, and then I don't know. I just loved McClatchy, and it was just a great school for you all.
So I need you to talk about Fluffy.
Oh,
Did you have that on here, Ellen?
Fluffy, yeah.
You did have it. Now I'm not seeing it.
I thought I did. Maybe I added it.
Oh, well, Pixie had puppies. We had the dog. We got Pixie from Howard Calloway. Do you remember Howard up on, what's the street up there?
Carter Drive.
Yeah, Carter Drive. And the children came home and said, "Howard Calloway has puppies and we can come and get one." And so we went up there and we all picked Pixie. And she was our dog for many, many years, 17 years. And Pixie had puppies. I can't remember how many. But
There were
everybody in
6.
the neighborhood came up then and got a puppy. And the Jinkses got one, the Kirtlands got one, Terry Healy got one, the Coxes got one, but you all already had a dog. I don't think you got one.
No, we didn't get one.
And did the Goods?
Yeah, Rebel.
Huh?
Rebel, that's right.
Rebel.
No, Rebel wasn't Pixie's puppy.
Oh.
They already had Rebel, I think. But anyway, and they all took, after they were weaned and could be taken away, they all took them. And one night I heard all this carrying on, and all the puppies had come back, or 2 or 3 of them had come back. And I was in my nightgown, and I went out and took all these puppies and took them back to their carports. But Ricky Cox will never get over. But then Fluffy was the
Collins.
Debbie Collins had Fluffy. Who's
Yeah.
yeah. Debbie had Fluffy, and one day, we were all but the Goose for some reason. I was over there, and Rebel Good, who was a famous dog, came in with this tail in his mouth, and it was Fluffy's tail. And Rick Cox was there, and 2 or 3 of the other children, and I said, "Don't you ever tell anybody about that tape." And Rick asked me about 5 years ago, "Miss Kelly, can I tell about puppies?" That was because Jane Collins was the owner of Fluffy's Tail. And
She doesn't know, right, to this day?
She might have sued. That was what we were told. As far as I know, she never knew.
So I skipped over something really important here, and that's when you learned about sex from your mother.
Oh, well, there was a little lady in Jefferson named Miss Cox, and she wore her hair pulled back in a knot, and she was a little bitty woman. They called her Tina. When she was born, she was so little her father could hold her in his hand, and they put her in the oven to keep her alive. So this is a story they told about Miss Cox. But anyway, she's a tiny little dried up lady, had the sweetest husband in the world. And one day I went in and my mother was in her bedroom sitting on the bed, and I said, "Mama, I have some questions to ask you about sex." And my mother was the most naive person you ever knew. I could entertain you all day telling you tales about Mom, but she just went white as Jan's outfit there. And she said, "Well, Miss Cox says it's horrible. And I think you better go out and play." And I never asked my mom about sex. If I wanted to know anything else, I asked my grandmother.
Is there anything else about Club Forest or the kids growing up, or how about did your kids get along with each other when they were growing up?
Yeah, they did pretty well. Ellie tells tales about how Lee mistreated her, but I don't remember a whole lot about that. They shared a bathroom, and I don't remember ever having a problem with the bathroom. Now, Leo had a friend, Sam Hodges, and he had 3 daughters, and they could not get along. They couldn't share the bathroom. So Sam took the door off, the bathroom door, and he said, "When you all learn to get along, I'll put the door back." But we never had to do that.
Mama, tell Jen why you are Bree. That's one thing I
Oh,
forgot
yeah.
to write down.
Oh, okay. When we were in high school, they didn't teach me any languages, but one year there was this teacher who could teach Spanish, so some of the people took Spanish, and we Spanishized every word we could, you know. We would, and my name was Bryan, my maiden name, so they called me Bryan. And they called my cousin Bryan because he was Bryan. They called me Little Bree, and then I outgrew him, so I got to be Bree. And Udi was named Oudaholt, and we called her Udaholt, and I started calling her Udi, and nobody else called her Udi except me. Well, the other girls would occasionally, but I was the only one who really called her Udi. But that's how I got Bree. And Leo always said, "You need to make up a good story about that," but I never did. That's how it was just stuck. I didn't like Francis. Well, there were about 16 Francises in Jefferson, and if a mother would get out on the porch and yell "Francis," 6 of us would answer. So I didn't like Francis. I never liked Francis. So I was glad to be Bree. I've been Bree ever since.
Was it hard for you to leave your house and move here?
Well, by the time I left, everybody else was gone, and I miss my yard more than I miss my house. But it had gotten to be a burden, so it was not as hard as it might have been to move.
Ellen, you have, what else have we not covered?
No.
Is
Can
it-
you think of anything else you want to say, Mama?
No, I loved Club Forest, I can say that. I felt very lucky to have those wonderful neighbors like Jean Ritchie and Bob Ritchie and the Goods, and it was just, do you remember the time of the firecracker incident?
Vaguely.
Y'all,
Okay.
y'all were somewhere else, the Riches. Y'all had gone somewhere, I've forgotten. And it was 4th of July, and we went over to the Rosses and were having hamburgers that night, cooking hamburgers out on the grill, on the patio. They didn't have the pool, did they? No. And the Goods and Leo and me and our children and the Good children and the Rosses. And we had fireworks, and they were in a paper bag in a chair, and Tootie was always smoking, you know, and she was smoking, and I don't know if the cigarette fell in the bag or what, but all the fireworks went off. Blew a hole in the patio. And right about that time, you all arrived. You were gonna come late for some reason, so y'all all got there. And just as you got there, Leo and Susan got the hose and saved the day. Burned up the chairs, one of those old plastic chairs, you know. I'll never forget that. And we used to, Bob Ross used to get lobsters, and we would all sign up for how many lobsters we wanted, and then we'd go over there and they'd cook the lobsters. So I could go on and on about Club Fires, but
Well, talk to us a minute about Lake Burton, because you all, I think, were one of the early houses up there.
well,
right?
in 1975, the Goods had bought a place, you know, and we used to go up there with them, and finally Michael said, Mama, we need our own place up here. And I said, I agree. And Leo said, we can't afford it, And I said, well, we'll just go up there and look. So Michael and I went up there, and we found the place. And we took Leo up there, and he went down on the dock, you remember, Ellen, and looked out, and he said, how much do you want for this place? And that was it. He was sold. And we just loved it.